Welcome back to a new episode of People and Purpose podcast by GMG. With me today is our Chief Audit and Risk Officer, Ahmed El Hendy, who is coming to talk to us today about the importance of risk management, what is audit, why is it important, and how it impacts the organizations as a whole. Good morning, Ahmed.
Good morning, Razan.
How are you today?
Good. Excited for the podcast.
I'm happy to have you with us today. I believe today we're tackling a subject that's very important and misunderstood in organizations. I think we conceptually, or at least for me, growing up in the corporate world, when we say audit, we talk trouble. It's almost like that police that's coming to make sure that you're doing things right. Obviously, as you mature and you understand truly strategically how the function operates, you start appreciating more why risk management itself is critical for organizations and how, in my opinion, and please correct me in your statements, audit complements and mitigates the issues that risk exposes at the beginning. So it's almost like we've reshaped the thinking by saying it's mitigating initiatives and strategic directions than it is we're coming to police you making mistakes, right? Which is what probably layman the world has been used to seeing it. And I understand also that risk comes in different categories, whether it's strategic, operational, financial. So before we get into the heavy stuff, I think it would probably be good for everyone to first put a face to a very heavy subject, and for you to tell everyone why has Ahmed El Hendy chosen this path in his life? Why audit? Why risk? What was it about it that you enjoyed and chose?
Okay, so actually I had a passion for the audit and risk because really it enables me more toward my real personality, which is more toward the integrity and ethics and transparency.
Integrity and ethics or policing?
No, integrity and ethics already, and transparency, because actually audit is one of the main standards we have in the audit is to have the auditor has to be more toward the ethics, integrity, and transparency. So I chose the audit career because I have a passion for the ethics and integrities and transparency in my work and in my personal life, and that actually motivates me to enable this in the workplace to ensure there is transparency and the proper governance and the proper ethics where I work.
So if the passion stemmed from ensuring things are done right, did you get more pleasure in discovering the wrong or in preventing the wrong?
Actually, I get more pleasure in preventing and anticipating the wrong things to happen. So preventing is more through internal controls and anticipating through risk management. So when you think about it, actually the audit profession itself has shifted over the last 10 years, more from using the role of compliance and police. It shifted more toward the risk management and anticipating threats in the organization to ensure we can prevent it or we can tackle it. So my anticipation is the passion I have to anticipate what can go wrong and how can I mitigate that.
So that takes us nicely into risk management. There's so much that I personally want to ask you on that subject, but let's start at least by maybe telling our listeners, what is risk management? What does it entail? When does it start in an organization? How often is it reviewed? What's the cycle of risk management?
Sure. So risk management is very simple. It's to identify and assess and mitigate the threats for the organization objectives. So it all starts by setting what is the organization objectives or goals. Based on that, the risk management start their identifying and trying to mitigate what can go wrong that will not allow the organization to achieve such objectives or goals. And in the current environment we have the risk landscape is so huge because it can go through financial risks, strategic risks, more of compliance risk. So the landscape is so big where the organization has to be prepared with the proper risk management framework to ensure it achieve the objectives and the targets of the organization.
How do you believe it impacts the culture of an organization? I know generally they say that the stability of an organization is dependent on three factors predominantly. The first one would be the people. The second one is the governance in terms of the policies and processes. And the third one is obviously the financials, right? I would say in today's age, I think tech is very importantly added into that mix. But if I was to say that your pillar is one of the main fundamentals in the stability of an organization, how do you say that this, from a cultural perspective, impacts an organization?
That's a very good question. So I agree with you, Razan. There is four main pillars that is the component of any organization: the investment, which is the money; the people; the systems; and the governance through the policies and procedures and processes that enables all these components to work together. So the culture has a very huge impact on these four components. Obviously, the money comes from the investments of the investors in the company. They are the one who enable the initial enablers for getting the right people to do the job, getting the right systems, and the policies and procedures to ensure it enable the business to achieve its objectives rather than restricting the business from achieving the objectives. So policies, if you think about the name itself, it might stem from police. It's not police, really. We're not policing people to follow the policy. The policies should be more to enable the business to achieve their objective, enable the people, enable the systems, so they can achieve the objectives. Because, again, the investment, any investor do the investment to get an ROI. We need to get a return on that. So these are the four main enablers in any organization. The culture has to be a collaboration culture. All of them has to work together in the same harmony to ensure we achieve the business objective.
If you were to take us through the cycle of your function, what would be how would you describe it in simplified language? What would be the starting point and how does the cycle kind of conclude itself?
So the cycle starts, let's say, in the organization start with the budgeting. Within the budget, they set the objectives for 1 year, 12 months. And there's also the strategic plan, which in some organizations can run from 3 to 5 years. This is our starting point. Once the strategic or the CEO and the strategic leaders set what are the objectives for the organization, we start the cycle for the enterprise risk management, where we start to identify the risks within the organization and outside the organization that can impact those objectives. And we start assessing those risks, high, medium, low. And as simple as we start to put the mitigation plans and the scenarios where if this risk actually materialized, what should be our action plan to enable us to still achieve the objectives. And we start to have the risk owners and ensure that they are trained properly how to mitigate the risks if they materialize, because the risk ownership lies with everyone in the organization. It's not only the risk management team. They are not the risk owners, in fact, because the risk comes from who's the owner for the objective, which is normally the business. They are the owners to achieve that objectives. So they, by default, become the risk owners. They are the one who needs to be trained and actually mitigate the risk if the risk happened. So that's fully the cycle. Some of the risk might materialize, some of the risk might not happen, but we still have to be prepared.
So basically, you're a governance body for the integrity of the organization. And then, if I understood correctly, audit comes in to just ensure that that governance is applied, right?
Yes.
But the actual ownership of bringing to life the integrity is set as a process by you, brought to life by the business, and you have a check-in by the audit team. Technically, that's the flow, right? So when we talk compliance, we go back into the whole policing world. What is compliance in the world of risk and audit?
So compliance, it's actually a very high level. If we talk about, it depends on regulatory compliance, or we talk about financial compliance, because the compliance stems from the rules and laws. So there is certain rules and laws depending on the type of business. So there is financial rules or standards, which is the accounting standards, for example. There is local laws and regulations, which is set up for the every business who needs to operate. So from this laws and regulation, the compliance is stamped, where we need to ensure that we're complying with these rules and regulations or laws or standards. So the audit part comes where we monitor and ensure that these laws or rules or standards are followed properly. Because there is a risk of not following these standards. There is a risk of wrong financial reporting. There is a risk of non-compliance with laws and regulations. So the audit role comes to mitigate that risks by ensuring we're following these laws and regulation and standards. Now, setting up the policies and procedures is an important step to enable the business so they can effectively and efficiently follow those standards without restricting them from doing business.
Right.
Because it might be perceived that laws and regulation is to restrict you. Actually, it's not to restrict you from doing business. It's to enable you. And that's where our role comes, to ensure that we enable the business, yet they are still complying with any laws and regulation or standards.
Well, I think this is a natural way for us to go back strategically.
Yeah.
When we said in risk, there are three factors: the strategic, the financial, and the operational. What are we talking about when we say risk to business in those three areas? What kind of crisis can an organization go through if they risk one of those three pillars?
So it depends on the type of the risk, obviously. I mean, as you said, there's financial risks. So if the organization is not compliant with the financial standards, it can risk liquidity problems with the banks. It can risk penalties from the governance bodies for the accounting or the reporting, which is, let's say, the company laws. If we talk about operational risks, which is more a day-to-day processes and policies that the operation use it can result in frauds that can happen. So there is the risk of fraud. There's the risk of error that can happen if the proper operational risks are not mitigated. Strategic risks are very much as important as all the other. Actually, I see as the most important risks that we need to address.
Just by word,
because the impact of the strategic risk, if not mitigated, can impact the whole organization, not a specific part of the organization. So the strategic risk is more to enable the business decision making by giving the right data, the right risks, so the decision making can be done with the right information. And that will enable the decision making to be in the right direction, which will enable the whole organization.
When we talk fraud, generally, that's the biggest fear of organizations, because I think it's just the most common that organizations and the people, general public, usually is used to listening to. Would you quantify the size of fraud in an organization to the excellence of the risk and audit function? Do they correlate?
Measuring the audit and risk capabilities versus the fraud, it's actually it is the right way to do it, in a way that if major frauds are mitigated, okay, or prevented, okay, and if it happens, it gets detected quickly, that's a big success for audit and risk. Yet the standard or the reality is that audit and risk cannot detect all the frauds that happen in the organization. There is plenty of examples, big, huge organizations where they have all the systems, all the processes, all the competent people, yet frauds happen there. I mean, and it's global. There's all these global scandals of how fraud happened in big organizations, though they have everything that should have been able to prevent or actually mitigate it. But still, fraud will happen in any organization. The success of the audit and risk is to mitigate the fraud before it happened. And if any fraud happened, big frauds, it should be able to detect it on early stages. Okay.
So what happens if they detect it? At that point, what is the involvement of the risk and audit team? Or is that now out of scope?
No, it would still be in the scope of the audit, especially the audit. Not the risk is more to prevent it.
Correct.
Audit will, after the detection, audit would be involved to ensure, first of all, quantify the impact of the fraud. What was the financial impact? What was the reputation? Because sometimes it can result in reputation impact on the organization itself. And quantify also how did that happen. That's the root cause of how did this. What were the missing controls? What was the root cause of this fraud? This is very important to ensure that it doesn't happen again in the future. Yet there is red flags that normally it's very much used within the audit and risk function across the practice. For example, if there is a regular override of controls that happen, that's a red flag for us that this regular override of controls can be a sign of fraud. Change in lifestyle of some of the employees, resistance for audits and reviews.
Wait, sorry. You highlighted something important. Change in the lifestyle of employees. How tangible is that?
If the change of the lifestyle in the employees is not correlating with the employee position or salaries or role in the organization, that is a red flag. Doesn't mean that the employee have done something
No, but
wrong.
even if they have, catching it at that, the whole ecosystem is not involved around the person, but the whole life that he leads outside. How much can an organization actually protect itself from things that are not written on paper? You know, like now everyone is a subject matter expert on how to cheat systems, right? That's true. Just like there are people that have a passion for integrity. We live in a world where there are people that have passion for breaking the rules, right?
True.
Or the conventional ways, right? How can the team take, I mean, to be honest, I'm not even sure if the right word is accountability, or how can they even mitigate things that are not tangible because they're not by the book? Okay, a guy comes with a fancy car, a fancy watch, and you think, okay, there's a question mark. You kind of know their background. Wife is probably not employed. They're living off of his salary, but maybe if daddy's rich, many permutations and combinations can lead to the final conclusion of saying, this is not adding up. But let's say we reach there. There's nothing on the books.
There's nothing on the books. But then we start to look into what is his roles and responsibility with the organization. What did he approve? What kind of scope he's managing? And we start to look if he can do any financial gains from his scope, in his or her scope in the organization. And if that happened, where was the control? So we start to look if any risk of personal financial gains from his scope in the organization.
See, I took that route because it's a more common route for people to be able to digest information related to a little bit more of a complex subject. So I think I'll take the question into a bit of a, I don't know if it's conventional or unconventional way. But in a case like this, we would probably raise a concern on the actual process, meaning the functionalities involved in the process. How does that lead the risk and audit department in terms of correlation of work between departments like procurement, departments like finance from a financial controlling perspective? Where are the overlaps? Where are the commonalities? How does it work?
So it's a very good question, because that leads to one of the main standards of internal controls. How to design an internal control is to ensure there is a segregation of duty. Which means if finance is responsible for some areas, where the procurement is also responsible for other areas. And that's how we design the controls, to ensure there is a segregation duty between the responsibilities of the procurement versus the finance. Now, how fraud happen? If there's a collision. Fraud cannot happen. I mean, one of the main risks where fraud can happen, collision. If someone from the procurement collide with someone with the finance, that means they can override the control, because the segregation of duty is not there. So finance, we put the controls with them to ensure that procurement do their job. They ensure that 3 tenders are done, or 3 quotations are done, and they follow the policy, choosing the right commercial prices that for the vendor, for example. The control needs to be placed with the finance. Now, if there's a collision between the finance and the procurement, they can easily cover themselves and do the fraud. Or if the procurement was able not to give the information to the finance and he can just do the fraud by himself, that's also another risk.
So that takes me to another interesting question. I'm telling you, your topic has suddenly become of interest to me because to me it's business, right?
Yeah.
It's no longer just the audit that comes and checks, right?
Yeah.
It is almost a lifestyle of organizations and success of organizations. In old times and in a lot of organizations in modern time, audit still reports to finance. Now, many say that's a conflict of interest. Others still believe it's the right approach. How do you, without me asking for your personal opinion, what is your objective feedback on the two directions?
Okay. So it's a very old school, I would say, that audit report to the finance. I mean, most of the organization I know have already shifted from that, where either audit report to the audit committee or they report to the CEO to align on as a strategic business partner, audit and risk. Now, how that was originated is because initially the audit was more focused on the financial audits. So auditors originally used to do financial audits, look at the numbers, ensure the revenues are right, ensure the P&L profits, margins are right. So that's why originally it was more toward financial audit. Now this has all shifted over the last decade to be more of a strategic audit and risk function. Why? Because we have a lot of, let's say AI right now came in place. So AI is more works on the financial, identifying any financial errors that happen. That shifted the mindset of the audit to be more of a strategic partner. One other thing is very important is that when audit reports to finance, there might be kind of not much independence, I would say, for the audit, because there might be some financial irregularities that happen within the organization where the audit cannot raise the flag on it because the audit report in the finance. That means I cannot report on myself saying I'm doing something wrong if it's part of the finance. So that's why it has to be very much in segregation of duties again. That comes to the same thing. The control the organization needs to put in place that audit shouldn't report within the finance. So if the finance has some errors or fraud happening, the audit can report on it.
So then that naturally leads me to have to ask you an extra question here. In the world of crisis,
Okay.
how does risk and audit come into action?
So it's during the crisis, or to actually the role of the risk management comes very important in the crisis management, where the risk management enables the crisis management in a way that they have to have a proper framework on solutions and plans and scenarios where it has to be practiced. If a crisis happens, this is what we're going to do. The natural disasters, which is COVID, rain, storms, floods, and all of that, still the crisis management needs to be planned and organized before it happened. And it's a very remote scenarios that another COVID might happen, or a pandemic, let's say, or a raining, flooding, all of that. It's remote risks. We always assess it as a very remote or unlikely risk to happen. But as a risk management, we still need to plan for what would be the mitigation. Now, if an unexpected risk happened or materialized where we need to deal with it, the best thing within the crisis management is to ensure that we are organized. No panic. Panic actually results in the crisis to get much more worsened. If you recall from in the pandemic or in the COVID, the first months everyone wasn't sure what's happening. But then when things started to get organized, the checkpoints, the vaccination, the who can go out at certain times, what are the precautions, the communication played a very important part. Start communicating to the mass what is happening, what they need to do. That helped to actually tackle the crisis. After 2 or 3 months with the COVID things start to get stable. So communication, being organized, no panic, start to assign the real roles and responsibility. These are the 4 main things that we need to do if we are in the crisis and we didn't anticipate it.
So GMG has seen a heavy expansion plan in the last few years, and that expansion came in from different ways: the organic expansion, let's say the acquisitions. Some of them were organic, some of them were new brands introduced to the market. And we obviously operate in so many different industries. Those industries have different climates, different mentalities, different landscapes altogether. What would you say is the biggest support to an organization that the audit and risk function can provide for the long-term sustainability of an organization that is going through a growth journey?
Actually, the expansion and the journey that GMG had over the past 5 years is amazing. And if you think about it, I don't think this is kind of the stop or where we are right now. I think this will keep continuing.
Hopefully, yes.
Because I believe in the current environment we're living in and the market that we're living in, change is the only constant. So we have to keep changing and we have to keep expanding and growing. We cannot just sit there, okay, and be happy with what we have or with our achievement. We have to keep changing and growing. Now, when it comes to risk and audit, there is a big scope for us to support the growth and the expansion plan and the change that is happening, that comes along with it. So it can happen on the three, and it will happen on the three levels: the strategic, where we will, from the risk perspective, we're gonna be working more toward what is the objectives of the expansion or the growth, what we need to achieve, and we start to do the risk assessments to enable the business decision making during the whole journey for the growth and change. From the operational level, also to enable when the expansion and the changes happen, we enable the business on the ground level in the retail, that the people there can deliver based on the strategic plan. There is also a good scope from the financial risk, where we actually start to risk assess any financial impact that might happen based on the growth or the expansion plan. And that will enable also on a strategic level the decision making. So the strategic decision can be aware of what are the risks related to financial risks, operational risks, and strategic risks. So, and how they will be mitigated if these risks materialize. So the business decision can be done at the right time with the right impact.
Fair enough. What about AI? Do you believe AI is playing a very important role as people claim that it is right now? How do you feel it has impacted, if at all, at this stage, your life?
So AI is an amazing innovation. To be honest, I love it personally, and I love it because it actually enables my function in many areas, and I think it doesn't only enable audit and risk; it enables many other functions it enabled the whole organization. To be honest, when AI came into the picture and becoming right now the trend or the talk for everyone, and every organization is trying to use AI and enable it within the organization. Initially, there was a lot of risks. People were talking about, okay, AI now in the picture, or organization can use AIs. That means that will result in a reduction of the number of employee or a huge layoffs. That's not true, and it proved it so far. AI coming here right now, and it's enabled in the organization, that didn't result in any reduction in the workforce.
Oh, wow, interesting.
It's very much proved right now. And the impact might actually is that rather than audit, for example, I'll get the audit impact on it. Rather than audit going and auditing 10,000 transactions to ensure there's no problems in it.
Yeah.
Now we use AI. Okay, for example, or automation, or continuous control monitoring. And actually we try to prevent it through the continuous control monitoring. That means it shifted my time and focus. Rather than I spend, let's say, 10 days doing this, I shifted more toward more important things to be done, like more on the risk management, placing the right controls to prevent the fraud or the errors, So it's shifted our focus more to more effective and efficient tasks to do, rather than disabling us. It didn't disable us, or it didn't impact our employees or our function.
Fair enough.
Thank you, Razan. It was a pleasure to attend the People with Purpose. I like that conversation. It actually triggers me more on thinking of new things to do within the audit risk function in GMG.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Ahmed,
Thank
for
you.
being
Thank
here.
you.
Thank you for listening to yet another episode of People and Purpose podcast by GMG.